Good afternoon, everyone, or good day if you're tuning in from another time zone. I'm Michael Dukes, Director of the Center for Land Use Efficiency with UF-IFAS, and today we are happy to bring you the sixth installment of our Landscape Summit. So we are just over halfway through every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Thanks for attending. I have put in the chat where you can see the schedule for the rest of the summit. No doubt if you're here today, you probably already know that. Today we have one speaker. Just due to scheduling issues, we have one speaker this week and one next. That's my cat, who's a Zoom star. Today we have Dr. Heike Ketchett-Ryan. Heike, is that pretty good? Close enough? Good enough for government work? Heike is an associate professor and extension economist specializing in behavioral and experimental economics. He investigates factors driving consumer demand for green industry products and services and studies the link between urban environmental policies and pro-environmental behavior. He has a PhD from the School of Economic Sciences, the Interdisciplinary School of Economic Sciences, Washington State University. So he's a long way from there today. With that, Heike, the floor is yours.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session. So this work is a collaborative project with now my former graduate student, Xiuming Zhang, who is now an instructor at the Santa Fe College. And of course, I want to thank the Center for Landscape Conservation and Center for Landscape Conservation and Ecology, currently Center for Land Use Policy, Land Use Efficiency. I'm mixing all the names here. Sorry about that, for sponsoring the project. And so this is one of the components of the overall project we did with Xiuming Zhang. One of the other components were looking at willingness to pay for other environmentally friendly attributes related to landscapes. But in this particular presentation, I'm going to talk about financial incentive programs and the sort of contribution of those incentive programs to improve the adoption of environmentally friendly loans. So a couple of considerations to motivate the topic. As in many things, there are, of course, a trade-off when it comes to deciding about different practices when it comes to urban landscaping. And so there's this trade-off between economic benefits and environmental costs. And that balance is very difficult to maintain from any point of view, from the homeowner point of view, or from a decision maker point of view, regulatory point of view, because there are so many considerations in it. So nevertheless, state and local governments and water management districts, university extension programs try to come up with programs and strategies to promote environmentally friendly landscaping practices. In our research projects, we try to understand what are the determinants of this pro-environmental behavior and what are the elements of the overall design that positively influence preference for traditional, for alternative landscapes. And here, by mentioning alternative landscapes, we are referring to designs that are different from so-called conventional designs. And by conventional, we mean mostly turf grass coverage and up to, say, 25% areas that are non-turf grass, shrubs and plant beds, so areas that are not covered by turf grass. So the stakeholders involved in these kind of programs are usually using a variety of methods, and if we combine them into two different groups, one being price-based policies, which are things such as low-rate financing or rebates for loan conversions. So those are based on financial measures. But the other type of incentives are non-price. And so, for example, educational programs that teach homeowners and residents about some of the especially environmental benefits of such conversion programs, those are non-price-based policies. And so these rebates, of course, are considered, well, private industry has also programs for artificial loans. So it's not only the sort of driving force behind it may not necessarily be environmental conservation, because from private industry point of view, that's purely profit generation or profit maximizing behavior that leads to programs that stimulate artificial turf grass use. So overall, the gap in the literature is that the way those price-based policies work, the extent to which they have positive impact on behaviors is less understood, and some of our work it aims to address those issues. A couple of research questions here to consider and that we had in mind was that, well, are homeowners generally interested in loan conversion, let alone financial incentive programs? And another question that stakeholders are interested in is, what's the likelihood that the homeowners will participate in the financial incentive programs? How successful would they be? For that to work, there's, of course, many pieces of information needed, but one of the pieces is that what is the minimum level of rebate or incentive so that it triggers the decision by individual homeowners. And then, of course, because landscapes are so diverse, and one thing we had to do is to focus only on Florida, although within Florida, there's also a lot of diversity. But loans are so diverse that these programs may also, or preferences for rebate programs may also differ depending on type of the design that is being promoted. So for this particular project, we conducted data from a panel of Floridian residents, slightly over 1,200. And so the summary results that I'm going to talk about here are fairly similar. So I'm going to focus on one subsample of that we used environmental benefits information to sort of understand the information treatment effects. The economic benefits related data is not being presented today, but overall, in terms of perceived contribution of environmentally friendly landscapes or rebate programs, in general, were very similar. Our screening criteria included, of course, informed consent form to participate. The participants had to live in a single family house with landscape, and they had to be the primary decision maker in the household related to landscaping. So this is a quick summary of socio-demographic variables, just to give you an idea of the sample as compared to Florida averages. Of course, when it comes to sampling, regardless of the variety of measures used also by panel provider companies, there's also always this challenge of not being able to maintain really close to the true means across the geographic area you're studying. So as you will see in terms of race and ethnicity, we're oversampling from Caucasian population. In terms of college degrees, graduate degrees, there's some differences there. But overall, the sample is not too different. So it is acceptable for analysis here. So some general information here. We know that although in Florida, because of the weather throughout the summer months is not very favorable for gardening and landscaping, but we do have a pretty large proportion of respondents that are sort of DIY homeowners. In fact, in one of our studies, we are comparing preferences for Florida-friendly landscaping between DIY and non-DIY residents. And also when it comes to the last time that they renovated or made any restoring or any sort of renovation in their residence or landscape, So the majority of responses were in the past 5 years, although there's some small distribution. But so throughout the past 5 years, the respondents reported that most of them engaged in renovation projects. What I have next is annual expenditures. Again, as you will see here, there is some distribution, but most of the responses were centered around 2,000 to 5,000 expenditures per project. And for those of you who have done any projects in your landscape, you know that this is very costly, could end up being very costly project. And it's not only just resolding related, right? Many times there is damage to irrigation systems that you need to fix. Just an example, recently I had to fix some of the irrigation sprinklers that were damaged by the project that was done next door, although they sort of replaced the sprinklers, but they were not the ones that I liked. And instead of going back and forth, I just ended up replacing them myself. So it's pretty costly projects to conduct. And when it comes to sort of perceived contributions, which is important consideration for homeowners, I mean, there's this little doubt that almost everybody believes that well-maintained landscapes contribute to home values. In fact, there is also beliefs that that crime rates are lower in neighborhoods that have very well maintained landscapes. So this may or may not be true, right? But that's what a lot of people believe in. In terms of overall contributions to property value, as you will see in the bar chart, there is also some distribution, but I think the average is centered around 14%. And the other subsample has very, very similar distribution. So there's a lot of distribution centered around 6 to 10 and 11 to 15% that they believe contributes toward property values. So just to continue here, remember I also talked about research question that, well, these preferences may differ depending what type of landscape designs we're talking about. So do they believe that, let's say, 50-50 split between turf grass and non-turf grass will have the same type of contribution to the value? Of course not. As you will see here, the second, so this crimson color, I guess, represents up to 5% perceived contribution, and the green portion is a 6 to 10. So when up to 5% was a bit similar across 3 different designs that we have. And remember, we were comparing these 3 different designs with the conventional design that we're considering mostly turf grass and only up to 25% non-turf grass. So for the 6 to 10% perceived contribution and 11 to 15, there is some variation going from 100% non-turf grass to mostly non-turf grass and to equal split between turf grass and non-turf grass areas. There's smaller proportion of people that indicated 16 to 20 and over 20% contribution to property values. So we wanted to understand, like in general, what are the better mechanisms of financial incentives that residents prefer. And so these are the top 4 options. And as you'll see, rebate cash incentives are, of course, like very attractive. So they were preferred over tax deductions or knowing that there is a positive return on investment or low interest rate financing options. So this is very natural. Everybody, of course, prefers financial benefits, quick cash rebates, but we'll see that when it comes to actually making them change their decision, it's not that straightforward. So here what we are asking them is, this was 2-step question. In one, the respondents were asked to indicate if they believed rebates will improve the likelihood that they will adopt the conversion program. And so for different landscape designs, we asked the minimum sort of acceptable level of rebate that they would be requiring. So as you will see, the second, third, and fourth bars in each design, those are less than 10%, between 11 and 20, and between 21 and 30. So those are the three bars that represent the responses in terms of minimum, in terms of percentages, minimum rebates that they would require in order to trigger the decision making. So this is the percentage of the total cost of the project. And then, so the next three bars, as you will see, I'm highlighting across three designs to kind of to show you the difference between, say, the 50% design and 100% non-turfgrass design, which, according to our earlier studies, is the least preferred, at least aesthetically speaking. The curb appeal, from curb appeal point of view, is the least preferred option. So you will see that sort of the threshold in terms of percentage, minimum percentage rebate to accept is higher for those designs, starting at 31 to 40, 41 to 50, and more than 50% in order to agree to participate in the program. As opposed to that, those higher sort of requirements or minimum levels to agree, those are a bit lower for the 50% design or 25 to 75% designs. And so we also asked the similar question, but people think differently when you ask them about sort of dollar values versus percentage of the total cost of the project. And in this case, we also had some variation, maybe a bit more visible than the previous case. And so if I highlight, just excluding the no rebate requirement, people that indicated no rebate needed or they did not know, just moving from 25 cents per square foot to 50, 75, and $1. So again, we'll see that higher per square foot values were indicated for the 100% non-turfgrass landscapes. And so I guess that's expected because people associate non-turfgrass designs with, of course, a lot of plant material that need to be installed and maintained, of course, afterwards. So this is sort of the picture in terms of square dollar values per square foot. So next what we had, so these are so far we were talking about just summary results overall, what people believed. But then we did also model these data to try to understand how do these answers matter when it comes to actually understanding the extent to which they change decisions. So we ran mixed logit regression models first. And so as you will see, and bad news. So this is not one of those presentations where everything works as expected. So it turns out rebates actually don't positively influence homeowners' decision to engage in program when they are considered in a broader sort of context, when there is other considerations such as pollinator-friendly attributes, irrigation-related, the proportion of the landscape, so many considerations combined. So just the presence of the rebate, well, it was not statistically significant, at least in our sample. But then, so that makes you think, again, remember going back to our research question, we were thinking, so how would this differ depending on different landscape designs? But then how about, how would these effects differ if you experimented with people with different kind of value orientation? So what we did here, we did latent segmentation analysis to try to analyze this data for two different segments. And so they're called latent because they're not easily observed, but we can tease out those different groups by looking at how they respond to preferences for attributes turf grass attributes or lawn attributes that are sort of related to environmental benefits as opposed to non-environmental, just like aesthetic, how the lawn looks. So I don't know if this is the best term, but we call them environment-oriented group. And the other group that we sort of put them in a group that were not environmentally, so they were not really picking those environmentally friendly attributes as important factors. Those we call them turf grass oriented group, right? So those are two different groups. So what happened here overall, when we look at the effects of rebates for the full sample, turns out the effects are not statistically significant, meaning they don't really, the presence of them didn't really change their decision to switch. But if you separate out people who were environmentally concerned, so they prefer those attributes if you show them the full list, for those individuals, actually the presence of rebate did change their decision positively. So they were willing, the probability that they would switch was higher and positive than the group that sort of was not in the environmentally oriented group. So this is kind of the full picture. What I want to, I guess, end the presentation is just with a couple of points for consideration, and we can maybe continue in the Q&A session. But generally, rebate programs work, and research studies specifically looking at the outcomes in terms of environmental benefits or economic benefits, they show there's positive relationship between the implementation of the program and these outcomes, right? Desirable outcomes, environmental conservation and economic benefits. So in terms of environmental benefits, of course, the quickest thing comes to my mind is water or savings in water use, water demand. And in terms of economic benefits, although this one study I recently read found only 1% that the property values appreciated 1% for those who participated in the programs. But then there is one huge barrier here and that was consistently shown in our surveys, in our analysis, and that's the consideration of maintenance aspect of these landscapes. We all know that newly established lawns look super neat and they're beautiful, but if you visit the same projects a year after, they don't look the same, of course, and there's a lot of that depends on individual maintenance, whether or not it's done by residents themselves or they hire professional services to maintain. So in fact, I wanted to sort of continue this project by looking at deeper into how rebates work and what are the mechanisms to increase the probability of adoption. And one thing it would be interesting to look at is how would the effectiveness of rebate program or people's likelihood to engage increase if it was coupled with, let's say, short-term maintenance, 6 months, 1 year. So not only it gets established, but also it gets maintained professionally for, let's say, not only just a few months that it helps to establish, but just for a bit more extended time, let's say 1 year. So that would be interesting to look at, see how the likelihood to engage changes based on that added benefits of rebate programs. And of course, readily available information for homeowners is always welcomed information, especially about environmental benefits. I believe that would also improve the adoption rates statewide. So with that, so this is 25 minutes. I think we have plenty of time to discuss any questions you may have. So please go ahead and ask questions if you have any.
Thanks, Hike. Imagine 90 people clapping and cheering. Imagine that applause.
Hopefully.
That'll have to do until we can all meet together again. We got some questions coming in. So for those of you out there, please put your questions in the chat. Let's just go right to the first one. And I have a few of my own, actually, if we can get to them. So first question was, where in Florida are the respondents? Is it overall or a particular region?
So the way we sample is they are distributed according to the density of population. So we don't control the urban, suburban, and urban areas. So we just, the panel companies sample statewide. And when we look at the distribution of these areas, it's sort of proportional to population density in the state. So it's pretty much spread all over the state.
Very good.
But we do have the possibility to conduct surveys in specific areas. So we can specifically target counties or urban areas.
Okay. Next question. Can you mention examples of rebate programs in Florida?
Yeah, so they are, so of course these programs are not universal in the state of Florida. But well, the closest, I don't know if the question came from the campus area, but Alachua County has this rebate program. And so that's, I believe, 50% of expenses related to renovation, and the limit, I believe, is $2,000. I don't know if the program is ongoing right now, but it was there a while ago at least. St. John Water Management District had program, and I don't know if where they implement exactly, but city governments have, City of Stewart has a program. I can't remember exact percentages how much they provide funding for. City of Winter Haven has program. So it's very diverse. It could be your utilities that provides rebates. It could be at water management district level, say funding available for, so there's grant funding that landscaping services companies can apply for. And once they receive that, they can utilize that amount to incentivize residents to switch. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's very disaggregated. And yeah, there are different programs, and the requirements and criteria to qualify are, of course, different.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and there's another relatively new one, Tampa Bay WaterWise program. You can Google it and check it out for the run by Tampa Bay Water in that region. Actually, you mentioned,
just to add real quick, Michael, some of the programs, of course, the criteria is very restrictive, and it makes sense. And for example, it needs to be installed by certified landscapers, and some programs require that the landscapers be Florida Water Star certified landscapers. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Yeah, and actually the next point made by Stacy Greco, who's with Alachua County, she pointed out Turf Swap is the program in Alachua County, and she says that it's still ongoing. And another example, FDEP is funding some work in Pinellas County. She further says that Alachua County has a survey out right now for the Turf Swap participants, and she would like to compare notes with you when they get that survey back. So,
yeah, and I want to take this opportunity to thank Stacy for her support. We did communicate with her. I know she been exchange emails and spoke with her during the summit as well. So thank you for supporting early on when we were engaged in the project.
And by the way, on, I think our last summit date is March 31st, whatever that last Wednesday is. That right, Emily?
Yes.
Yeah, March 31st. We're going to have a panel, and I think Stacy's on that panel, and Deirdre Irwin from St. John. So the question of what programs are available would be a good question to bring up again at that point. Bradley Spatz asks, if cash for grass programs generally work, how is work, in quotes, defined? What's the indicator of success? Is it number of participants, potable gallons of water saved, rebate expenditures, etc.?
Yeah, so just to clarify, by work, I meant so that the intended outcomes are positive, meaning reductions in water demand and also contributions to property values. So those are sort of tangent benefits, financial benefits. So yeah, that's what I meant by work. And water savings, of course, the range, and Michael, you also have a lot of research in that area. The range is, so it's a pretty wide range when it comes to Florida-friendly landscaping and these environmental benefits. It could be upwards of 40% of water use savings. However, everything is relative to the sort of initial usage. If you compare those who are overwatering, of course, that savings would be, the range will be high. But there are lots of residents who are underwatering. So for them, that the savings may not be that significant in terms of the volume.
All right. Brad Buck asks, the study you're studying, was this Schumann's dissertation?
Yes, so this is Schumann's dissertation, and there's parts of the data that we're still analyzing. It was pretty extensive data collection. We had multiple data collection efforts. We had online surveys, we had surveys in our lab where people came in person because we wanted to look at how different the preferences are when they are faced with a test in person. So those are people who are genuinely interested in participating in such surveys compared to those who are just doing it online.
Yep.
Yeah, so there were multiple data collection efforts.
So next question is, well, it's a statement and a question. Less lawn does require more specialized maintenance. It's just not mow, blow, and go. And the question gets at, what about a certification program for general maintenance guys? I don't know if this is a necessary question for you, Hike. You are welcome to opine on it, but I know FNGLA has programs for certification for different levels. They just have a new one out, a irrigation technician certification, and so forth. But I guess to get at the question, pesticide applicators are licensed by the state. Fertilizer applicators have to go through the GIBMP training, but there's not such a thing for maintenance. There's not a requirement for maintenance.
Yeah, I know UFIFAS extension facilitates the trainings in our research center. We do see them all the time taking the trainings and exams. But in terms of maintenance, yeah, I'm not sure. But specifically certification, not sure.
Henry Mayer asks, in the survey, is it perceived that turf doesn't have any benefits?
No, of course not. It's just what we were trying to understand is if you are a homeowner that has sort of conventional landscape, and if you would consider switching to one of the alternative designs, do you perceive that it would contribute positively to your property value? But yeah, so it's alternative landscapes, of course, doesn't mean automatic environmental benefits. It's how you do it, right? So you may have 100% turf grass design lawn, and if everything is done right, so the potential environmental impacts could be very minimum or zero, right? And that, of course, there could be positive benefits too, because of some of the functional benefits of turf grass, such as the rest of the plants. And of course, turf grass overall, if you look from industry point of view, there is huge economic impacts too, positive economic impacts that this industry brings to the state's economy. So we can't ignore that either. This line of research, of course, is not support for non-turf grass designs. It's just in our projects, usually what we do, we try to gauge consumers' preferences and how would they react and what would be the adoption trend given different conditions. But we are not, of course, because we simply don't do that kind of research to determine sort of the net benefits of switching or just not designing lawns with turf grass. As I said, there is pretty significant economic contribution to the state economy by this industry, by sod growers industry.
Yep, I agree, and we can't ignore that. And it's human nature to simplify a problem.
Yeah, I mean, so jobs and
Yeah.
revenue contributed. Of course, there's a ripple effects and all these salaries paid to the workers in that area that get spent, and so there is like multiplier effects, right? I have a detailed report on that too.
Mhm. Yeah, one of our earlier sessions in the summit, we kind of talked around this. It's not so much about turf. It might have been the session with Dr. Kimworth. It's not so much about the turf as the inputs. If you have a high level inputs, that's what we're trying to get at for the water consumption side of it and the environmental side of it. I think this question was answered. Are the surveys sent statewide or centered in Gainesville? Statewide.
Yeah, no, it's statewide. And just Michael, just to add real quick to what you just said, when it comes to, of course, application of nutrients, and Dr. Shaddix, for example, from UFIF has written on that extensively. It's not really what you put, like there's a lot of confusion between people trying to use organic fertilizers and inorganic. I mean, it's very similar to food intake. In fact, one of my students right now is starting a project to look at the extent to which people underestimate calories when they eat organic and they eat more. So it's just very similar. If you are applying organic fertilizer, it doesn't mean you can over apply, right? So because it gets converted to the same chemical component, it doesn't matter where it started, organic, inorganic, it gets converted to one of the main macronutrients.
Yeah, there's this difference between
benefits, but
we want to do the right thing, right? But there's this difference between wanting to do the right thing and then actually carrying it out. I don't know. This is a statement, not really a question, but Marion County has a rebate program that is ongoing for FFL renovations, Florida Friendly Landscaping renovations to existing landscapes. Michon Fabio with Marion County was the commenter on that. In the chat, there's a comment about Stewart has a turf replacement program. Stacy says she's glad to collaborate in the future. Hike.
Thank you, Stacy.
Next question. In the survey questions, I believe you asked about how much a home's value would likely be increased by landscape conversion. Was there a similar question to gauge whether any survey participants worry that landscape conversion might negatively impact home value?
No, it wasn't. So there was, I guess those kind of responses would be sort of their belief that it doesn't contribute, like zero. But I can't remember exactly how the question was asked, meaning whether or not we had our scale starting at zero or zero being in the center, but I can check on that.
All right, very good. I'm looking at a later comment where we were talking about the nutrients, and AJ Reisinger says nitrogen is nitrogen. Lorna Bravo, and Lorna's going to be one of our upcoming speakers in a couple of weeks. She says Green Advantage has a certification program for the maintenance and trade people. Yeah, but I think it's optional. Let us know in the chat, Lorna, if that's the case. So it's not required necessarily speaking, certainly not required statewide. Who financially supports turf swap programs? I'll take a stab at it. Stacy, go ahead and comment, but I believe that was through a grant from St. Johns River Water Management District, and it may have been a combo with the county contributing as well. Alicia says, some counties have GIBMP certification requirements for all landscapers, including just maintenance professionals, but that's only a few counties in South Florida. Okay, so that gets at the certification. Yes, Lorna says optional. Bob Stamps, ecosystem benefits do not seem to be part of this research. Do you have any links to research in that area related to home landscapes?
Dr. Stamps, thank you very much for attending. I expected you. So we did not focus on ecosystem services in this, but that's a very good point. And I know we spoke about especially Lake Apopka related benefits. But yeah, we did not specifically focus on ecosystem services.
Okay, were there any, and Stacy says turf swap was
There
initially,
were some,
go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Michael. Of course, there were closer elements there, like pollinator-friendly landscapes. So there was one also part of the project where we tried to estimate willingness to pay. And so if I remember correctly, the willingness to pay for an option that your landscape was designed to be pollinator friendly was up to $1,300. So if we're looking at a project up to $5,000, so there was $1,300 premium for landscapes that had pollinator friendly attributes.
Stacy says, yeah, turf swap was initially funded by St. John's River Water Management District, and it's currently funded by Suwannee River Water Management District. Alachua County provides staff time. Were there any notable differences in responses between the I designed my current landscape versus it was already here when I moved in?
Unfortunately, we did not analyze the data based on that particular variable. But yeah, so the paper I mentioned in which we're comparing DIY versus non-DIY, that may answer the question, but we don't have the results yet.
And that comment is kind of getting at, was there any difference between HOA versus non-HOA participants?
Same there. We do have that question, and we also had an open-ended, I believe, question. Let them complain about HOAs, because they, we know there are also downsides of being living in HOA communities. But yeah, so same way. So the intention is to look at the data from those different, socio-demographic cuts, and also HOA versus non-HOA. I know Liz Felter did research on looking at sort of the barrier associated with HOA, the board of directors, or so that circle of the barrier.
Yep, and we have, just to plug, on March 24th, we have Barbara Stage, who is a lawyer that works with Florida Friendly Landscaping. She works with HOAs and conflicts with HOAs and residents, and her talk will be talking about HOAs and FFL. So tune in for that one. Brad Buck asks, is Suwannee River Water Management District the only water management district that funds turf swap? Brad, St. John's funded originally in Alachua County. Suwannee River's funding now. Yeah, I think that's what we know. I don't know about the south part of the state. Barbara McAdams says they have a provision in the landscape irrigation rebate program to replace turf with low maintenance ground cover / plants, I guess, funded by Water and Sewer Department. Let's see, and she has Barbara, you put your link to the panelists only. So Wendy asks, please summarize study conclusions. Wendy, this is being recorded and it will be posted online in a couple of days, and you can go back through again. So Barbara points out, we don't call our program turf swap, but it is essentially replacing turf with FFL low maintenance plants. And she has pasted the link in. Okay, I have a couple questions as people are still putting theirs in. And Heike, I appreciate you leaving plenty of time for conversation questions. That was kind of what we wanted to do with these, but and it is working out that way. It's just we never have enough time for all the questions. That's just the short and long of it. So I wonder, I was listening to your study with the survey, and you're talking to people, getting their preference or getting their survey responses, but are there studies out there looking at the actual effect, the actual implementation of rebate programs? Because people say one thing and sometimes do another.
So I think I mentioned this a couple of years ago, and it didn't work out in terms of funding and start a project. What I would really want to do is to estimate, as you mentioned, the real effects, economic effects, let's say, let's let alone water savings aside for now. So there is enough well, not enough, but there's a lot of data sources now, such as Zillow.com, that provides data to researchers to look at the property price trend. And of course, there is many factors, right? So macroeconomic factors, but then also to incorporate a variable that has to do with the renovations done specifically on landscapes. So that improvement, you can ask anyone if renovating your kitchen or bathroom is a great idea, then if everybody has, right, so positive response. We all know that contributes definitely a selling point. But that data, that the money spent on renovating landscapes, improving landscapes, which could be upwards of 20,000. So the range is very wide, right? So that data is not captured in the MLS system. So there's no easy way to sort of tease out the effect of, so what's the contribution to the house price trend that is attributed to renovations and improvements in landscapes. So that's what you're asking, and it's a very interesting question. We need to do that. It's just I need to figure out funding source and get started on that. Well, Michael, I gotta admit, unfortunately, I entered the wrong date in my calendar for this year's. So I guess I'm not submitting proposal this year because I thought it was in February and it was in January.
Oh yeah, you said that the other day. Yeah, and I thought that sounded weird, but I didn't put two and two together. That's okay. There's a whole bunch of funders on the line today. Maybe they will jump on that idea.
Yeah, so there is a way to analyze the data to understand the contributions of these improvements to the real improvements, not what people say they think.
Right. Actions. So it was interesting to me in your graphic there that the larger number of people reported, if I read it correctly, that with a pretty modest rebate, like less than 10%, 11 to 20%, that they would do the somewhere there. Yeah, they like kind of looking at the left in the middle graphic, that's pretty modest, like less than 10% financial incentive is $10 on 100. It's really nothing.
Yeah, but remember, this is the minimum for them to consider.
Right.
Yeah, so it's acceptable, but doesn't mean that they would be that would be sort of
right. I guess maybe I'm an outlier. My minimum would be much higher, but that's me.
Yeah, in fact, I believe Orange County Utilities has rebates for turf grass replacement. There is a long list of things that you need to provide, which is, I guess, that's acceptable. They need to, have their criteria. But it was a very small amount, and I thought, okay, I would think about whether or not it was worth doing all the paperwork, because so I have skin in the game. My landscape right now, for several years now, I'm considering what should be done, because it's not monoculture turf grass at all. I have a variety of
plants,
and I don't want to call them weeds because they're just like, they're plants. But yeah, so I am considering one of these options myself on my property, and I'm thinking about how much it would contribute to the value of my property. So I'm invested in this because, like I said, I have skin in the game, and I will be doing one of these, whether it's going to be just doing the same, which is about 80% turf grass, or I will be switching to one of these. And has to do, my trade-offs are right now, of course, both financial and also environmental considerations. And then there is restrictions. Of course, it's conditional on HOA's restrictions.
It'll be interesting to hear your perspective once you embark on that.
If there are any stakeholders out there want to experiment with, what is it, the program? Swap Your Yard?
Turf Swap.
Turf Swap. There's a candidate down here in Orange County.
That's Alachua County, though, unfortunately.
Shameless plug.
Let's see. So another, there's one more question I want to get to, but one thing that I talked with colleagues nationally, utility colleagues nationally, and one person from Southern Nevada Water Authority, which is the greater Las Vegas area, pretty progressive utility when it comes to conservation, as you might imagine in a desert. And anyway, his comment was turf swap, and they've done a lot of programs. They've done smart controllers, they've done high efficiency nozzles, they've done education, they've done audits, they've done all kinds of things. And he said the most effective, and I think this gets back to Bradley's question, the most effective was cash for grass, where they pay per square foot a value where you remove your grass and you remove your irrigation system. So in other words, you cannot, they basically replace it with a desert landscape.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an option here, but certainly there's a lot of landscape options where we could replace an irrigated landscape, whether it be grass or anything else, with something else that doesn't, that will survive and thrive without irrigation. I thought that was interesting because those programs are very expensive. $3 a square foot in some cases. You know, that's like 10 grand for a pretty modest landscape per landscape. But, you know, the water issues.
In fact, that's the study I mentioned that found 1% contribution to property values and 21%, although it was distribution for water demand reduction. That was, so it's a Harvard study, and that's the program that they researched, the one in Las Vegas. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a utility perspective, he was very pleased with that program because think about it, you're taking the irrigation out, so that's no longer a demand any way, shape, or form. The other programs where you're trying to make the irrigation more efficient, some of them are structural, you know, pressure regulation, high efficiency sprinkler heads, that's a structural thing. Things like controllers and education are not structural, meaning they may work or they may not work depending on individual behavior. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Okay, we've got one more content question for you, Hike, and then I think we'll probably wrap this up. Were the participants shown photos or illustrations of the design concepts?
Yes, so we did have images, and in a couple of my previous presentations included some of those pictures. In one experiment, we had, so for online surveys, of course, they were relatively smaller. They had to fit on a computer screen. And then, we had multiple front yard landscape photos side by side for them. And another experiment we did was 24-inch computer screen. That was the size of the image they looked at. So they would view one landscape picture one at a time. The reason was we were also tracking their eye movements, trying to understand where they look at on landscape when they make decisions. And finally, the other one was much bigger. We had 8 75-inch TV screens vertically lined up. So one image was projected on 3 75-inch TVs side by side. So when you stand about 10 feet from that screen, it pretty much looks like you're looking at a landscape, very realistic 4K quality images. Michael, I'm sure you've seen those.
Yep.
In my lab.
It was very clear the differences between the 50.
And the reason we wanted to do almost real scale, every time I say real world impacts of real world, it kind of makes me think that the rest of what we're doing is now real world. Yeah, so we wanted to do this big scale, actual like real world size, because they were standing in front of it. We wanted to have as close effect as to real world as possible. And in that case, they were wearing eye tracking glasses as opposed to the computer that had a eye tracking bar connected to it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, great. The questions have tapered off and I've hit my questions. So I think we are at an end. Thank you, Hike, for presenting today. And thank you everyone for attending. Join us next week. We'll have Dr. Paul Monahan, who continues this theme of the human behavior, and he'll be talking about human behavior and future of urban landscaping. With that, everyone have a great rest of the day and enjoy the beautiful weather we have this time of year.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.